I'm going to let Dr. William O'Hare from the Carsey Institute at the University of New Hampshire start with his a presentation about his study that has really led much to the public notice about the effect that the war has had on the rural community.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate being here today. As Michael said, I'm a senior fellow with the Carsey Institute at the University of New Hampshire, and speaking for Carsey, I appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel with other distinguished panelists. I'm going to talk about a study that we released at the Carsey Institute last November on Veterans Day, and it's really pretty simple. It looks at who is paying the price for this war in Afghanistan and Iraq in terms of who is dying, who is paying the ultimate price, whether that sacrifice is being spread across the country equally, or whether there are certain parts of the country, in this case rural areas, that are paying a higher price. And I think it's important to recognize that as tragic as the death of a young soldier is, it's not just the young soldier that is hurt, it's their family, it's their nieces and uncles, nephews, teachers, friends, and particularly in rural communities, I think those kinds of losses are felt more deeply because they're more closely knit communities. And so we looked at some data from the Department of Defense that I'll talk about in a minute. The bottom line for this study is that rural America is paying a higher price than the rest of the country for this war. And I'll talk about a little more about how I got to that conclusion, but the bottom line is, as you probably all know more keenly than I do, that rural America is paying a higher price for this war than the rest of the country. Let me just say a couple of words about how the study was done without trying to bore you too much with methodology, and it's pretty simple, so I don't think it'll be difficult. The co-author in this study, Bill Bishop, and I found almost by accident a file that's available from the U.S. Department of Defense that lists all the soldiers who had died in Iraq and Afghanistan along with their hometowns. So we took that file and looked to see where those hometowns were located, basically putting them into two categories, inside metropolitan areas or outside metropolitan areas, which we call rural and urban. So if they're inside a metropolitan area, we call that urban, outside is rural. That's a pretty common definition. When we did that, we found that of the 3,095 soldiers who had died as of the end of October last year, 825 of them went for rural America. Now, I don't expect you to remember those numbers or to quickly calculate them, but the bottom line is 27% of the deaths in Iraq and Afghanistan occurred to soldiers who came from rural America. And when you juxtapose the distribution of population, particularly military population, you find only 19% of the military age population live in rural America. So the point here is that a disproportionately high share of the soldiers who are dying or have died in Afghanistan and Iraq have come from rural America. Let me just repeat those figures again because I think they're the crux of what we did this study. 19% of the military age population lives in rural America. If the sacrifice for this war would be spread evenly, you would expect about 19% of the deaths to come from rural America, but in fact 27% of the deaths come from rural America. So a disproportionately high share of the soldiers who have died in Iraq and Afghanistan come from rural America. And I'll just quickly say this study we did was looking at deaths through October of last year. I quickly looked at the deaths last spring through April. The numbers changed, but the bottom line doesn't change at all. There's still a disproportionately high share of the soldiers who are dying in Afghanistan and Iraq come from rural America. In case you're interested, we're going to update this study again for Veterans Day 2007. The numbers will change, but unfortunately I'm pretty confident that bottom line will not change. It'll still be the rural communities, rural families, rural soldiers who are paying a disproportionately high price for this war. Let me say just a couple of words about why rural soldiers are a bigger share of those who have died. The first part of that question is they're more likely to be enlisted. There's soldiers from rural America make up a disproportionate share of the people in the Army and the other forces. The second question is why is that? And there's two common answers, one which we go into in more detail. One is anecdotal information about higher patriotism, higher sense of duty, higher sense of serving your country in rural America than in urban America. Particularly in the rural South, the tradition of serving in the military, for example, is one explanation as to why there are higher numbers of rural people in the armed forces. The second one, which I think is a more powerful factor, is the dearth of opportunities for young folks in rural America, which makes the military look more attractive than it would otherwise. both in terms of education and in terms of economics especially, there is less opportunity for young people, young adults in rural America than there is in other parts of the country. People on the panel here, I'm sure, can talk much more eloquently than I can about farming and how difficult it is to get into farming for young folks today and how the farming industry has changed. But it's not just farming, it's mining and timber and even manufacturing. A lot of people don't know there's a higher proportion of the labor force in rural America in manufacturing than urban America. Not more numbers, but a higher proportion. And just as a sidelight here, I guess, the fact that much of the heavy manufacturing has taken a hit over the last 5 or 6 years, the poverty rate in the rural Midwest has increased more than any other part of the country. The poverty rate in rural Midwest has increased more than any other part of the country. I'm convinced that's due to the feeder plants and other things that are existing in rural Midwest that have taken a hit because of this. I'll just quickly mention it's not so much unemployment in rural areas as underemployment, that people are getting jobs, but they're temporary, part-time, dead-end jobs. They're not the kind of full-time, year-round job with benefits and paying living and wage that young people need. So when faced with the dearth of opportunities in rural America, more and more young people are likely to join the military. So let me just end with 3 main points that I want to leave you with. One, I think I said it a couple times, but I'll leave you with it. Rural families are paying a higher price for this war than families in the rest of the country. And regardless of how you feel about the war, I think you have to agree that it's not fair that one part of the country should have to pay a higher price for this in their lives and in the lives of their loved ones than other parts of the countries. Secondly, that the higher death rate for soldiers from rural America is linked closely to the dearth of opportunities there, particularly economic and education opportunities. So there are things that could be done that would enhance the opportunities available for young folks there so they wouldn't feel compelled to join the military. And finally, I'll just mention that one of the reasons the Carsey Institute did this paper, and one of the reasons I'm involved, is that we hope this will elevate rural issues on the public policy and public interest agenda. As you probably know as well as I do, all too often what goes on in rural America is just ignored by the rest of the country. And the fact that 1/5 of the population lives there should account for something. So we hope this kind of study and the others we do at the Carsey Institute will elevate these kinds of issues on the public policy and in the public interest in the media agenda. Thank you very much.